Hey there, everybody. It's me, Lily Rose, the admin here at Encouragement Corner, and we are continuing on today in our Easter series. Please keep in mind as we're reading through these events that they happened in such a short frame of time. So it almost feels inadequate to spread it out over long weeks of time because all of this occurred in mere days of each other. And today we're going to take a look at the trial of Jesus, the irregularities of it, and how it was illegally done before we jump into the passage itself. First part, during the time of Christ, most trials involving a criminal procedure took weeks, if not months, to complete. But all of the trials Jesus was subjected to were completed within 9 hours of his arrest. And they were done in private, secretly. Also, you got to consider who the mob was that arrested Jesus. To answer that question, we look at the first error in his conviction, right? Because Jesus, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus went forward and said to them, "Who are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus said to them, "I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way." So that was in John chapter 18, verses 3 to 5 and 8. And Luke adds in, then Jesus said to the chief priests, captains of the temple, and the elders who had come to him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs?" That would be Luke 22:52. Notice that all of these who were involved in Christ's arrest included the priests and elders, his judges. Among them were also the very ones who bribed Judas. Moreover, Jesus was arrested secretly by night. He was not arrested on formal charges of any crime. There was no charge present. There was no warrant for his arrest and no statement of what he had done. They just simply took him. Contrary to what many people have written, saying that there was Jesus' arrest had testimony and evidence of his guilt, there really wasn't any. The ones that were giving testimony, false testimony against him, were his actual judges. And later, I have all these notes, guys, that I go through. One is from the David Jeremiah Study Bible, and also the NIV, Lou Giglio's Study Bible as well. And some of these notes are just like jaw-dropping because they dig in about what Roman custom was and how these arrests were, and the whole trial was just like a sham, you know? The first part that I saw in the trial itself is that they're trying to get him to convict himself almost by cajoling him into, well, who are you? Like trying to get him to say, I'm a king, or I'm in charge, or anything on that basis. And so if Jesus directly admitted being the king, they would be able to hand him over to Romans as a seditionist, which means that he was causing chaos and a ruckus and was a threat, basically, to the Roman Empire. And so they were trying to get him to admit these things. And he emerged from the sham trials legitimately identified as both the Christ, Messiah, and the Son of God, as promised in Psalm 110. So in Hebrew thought, a son shares his father's essential being. So when he says, yeah, I'm the Son of God, he's saying, I'm God, right? Because he's fully God and fully man. Pilate immediately then focused on the third of his charges. There were 3 that were being presented. One was the Rome misleading the nation, implying that he was leading Israel into conflict, which was forbidden. That he was telling them not to pay their taxes. That was another charge that they trumped up. And for identifying himself as Christ, a king, implying that he was in opposition to Caesar. So Pilate immediately focuses on a third of these charges and asks Jesus directly, if you're really the king, and he did this in front of the Sanhedrin, and Jesus said, you have said so. So an affirmative answer is implied in that, well, you said so, that's what I am. And so Pilate had no choice. And then we see him kind of going back and forth. So he went from Pilate to Herod, and back to Pilate, and then Pilate, we see him like, I don't know, like, his own wife is like, yo, wash your hands from this, right? And so he throws it up with a guy named Barabbas and says, hey, you can free somebody. Do you want to free Jesus, or do you want to free Barabbas? And then the crowd is screaming for Barabbas. So I just want to kind of throw that in there before we dive right into the text here of Jesus being arrested. And I'm going from John chapter 18. It says, when we finished praying, Jesus left his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas who betrayed him knew the place because Jesus had often met there with the disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers. Some officials from the chief priests, so some of the very people that would be judging him, are there pulling him out in the dead of night. And the Pharisees, they were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked him, who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. And Judas was the traitor, was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground, right? Remember, we hear about how every knee will bow in front of Jesus. It's that power and that authority, that boom, to the ground. I am he. Again, he asked them, who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, we love Simon Peter, right? Eager to do, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, put away your sword. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrest Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest, that year. Caiaphas was one of those who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus because his disciples was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside of the door. The other disciple who was known to the high priest came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter. He replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter was also standing there with him. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I have always taught in synagogues or at temples where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. So Jesus is right there asking for witnesses to speak on his behalf. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this what you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So he's going through all this stuff, guys, in a 9-hour period, from the garden, arrest, to this first guy, Annas, and then Caiaphas, and then he'll go to Pilate, then Herod, then Pilate, all in a very short amount of time. And that is not lawful at all. I'm going to skip over Peter's denial. I think we all kind of know that's kind of a highlight in most Easter time sermons of the rooster crowing 3 times. And then he is restored later where we see, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Later down the road. So on to verse 28 then. It says, then Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back into the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea? Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus asked, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release a prisoner at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. And with that, we're going to pause because the next